Terrell Bernard signed a contract extension. The Bills are in on a bunch of players and a little bit of herd mentality all coming your way today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate you all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. Got quite a bit to cover today. News on Friday morning of Terrell Bernard signing a contract extension with the team, so we'll break that down. I also want to explore some of the players that are available for trade, like DK Metcalf, like Trey Hendrickson, and talk about where I think the Bills should be in those conversations. And then we'll close it out with a few herd mentality items. But the big story, Terrell Bernard has agreed to a 4-year, $50 million contract extension with the Bills that comes in at $12.5 million per season. But most importantly, the percentage of cap at signing comes in at 4.48%. And when we had the conversation about Terrell Bernard's contract extension, I suggested around 4% as the dollar amount that made sense to me. And so I think that it makes a lot of sense in terms of where this contract came in from a dollars perspective. When you look at 4.48% of cap at signing, that's sixth highest in the NFL among off-ball linebackers. Fred Warner is number one at 10.4%. Roquan Smith, number two at 8.9%. Tremaine Edmonds, number 3 at 8.01. Zach Bond with the Philadelphia Eagles. That deal just got done a few days ago. That's at 6.09%. Then you have Patrick Queen at 5.35%. And here's where Terrell Bernard falls at number 6 at 4.48%. Just below him, Bobby Okereke with the Giants, 4.45%. And Azeez Al-Shaair, he's at 4.44%. I think that's exactly the right place for him to slot, right there with Bobby Okereke and Azeez Al-Shaair. I think those are his peers. Those are the players that I think he's a similar caliber of player to. And so I feel like this is a fair deal. And I don't look at it and feel like it's a major value for the Bills or a team-friendly contract extension. It comes across to me as fair. And so let's talk a little bit about Terrell Bernard's journey in this past season. Obviously a third-round pick in that 2022 draft class that now has seen Khalil Shakir and Terrell Bernard sign contract extensions. I'm not surprised that those players are the first two from that class. Contrast that to James Cook, who's looking for the contract extension, out there being pretty vocal and deliberate about what he wants. And meanwhile, Terrell Bernard and Khalil Shakir haven't really said anything, and it took care of itself. I think there might be something to that. But obviously, year 2, he becomes a starter for the Bills and really came into his own, made a lot of big-time splash plays, and was very excited about the player that he showed us in 2023. And then I think in some ways he built upon 2023 in 2024, but also I think there are some growth areas that I'm looking for out of Terrell Bernard, who last season played in 13 games with 13 starts. He did miss a little bit of time. I think that's part of the Terrell Bernard conversation is he's had some injuries pop up here and there. So we're looking for him to be a lot more consistent with durability. Was on the field for 87% of snaps, 104 tackles, 5 for loss, 1 sack, 1 interception, 3 pass breakups, and a fumble recovery. And I thought last year was a challenging year for Terrell Bernard. New play caller and Bobby Babich, and a lot of changes around him, especially on that second level where, you go into the season thinking that you're going to have Taron Johnson and Matt Milano as his running mates on the second level, and then Milano goes down with the bicep injury in camp. And then in week 1, you lose Taron Johnson to the forearm injury. And now it's him and having to communicate to everyone on the defense with a new play caller. It's tough while you still had a brand new pair of safeties that you're working in. So I thought the changes around Terrell Bernard were challenging for him to navigate. And I don't think he was as impactful in 2024 as he was in 2023. The splash plays were considerably down, the tackles for loss, the ball production, the pressure numbers. I mean, the pressure numbers really, really stand out, where in 2024, he had 10 pressures and 1 sack on 66 pass rush snaps. In 2023, he had 20 pressures and 6.5 sacks on 74 rush snaps. And I thought Sean McDermott did a really good job of kind of sending him on blitzes and allowing him to get after the quarterback. And I thought that was one of my favorite things about him, watching him at Baylor, was his ability to do that. And I think the circumstances of 2024 kind of took away from that piece of what he brings to the table. But obviously, Terrell Bernard is a big-time leader for this team. Bills only had 2 team captains last year, Josh Allen and Terrell Bernard. As a third-year player, a second-year starter gets the C on his jersey. And I think that says a lot about him and what he means to the locker room and the leader that he is for this football team. I think he's a terrific coverage player, really outstanding with his ability to kind of patrol the middle of the field and feel routes behind him, read the backfield, take routes off the menu. I think he's a very good coverage player. But I'm looking for growth out of Terrell Bernard as a downhill player, where his ability to take on contact and deconstruct blocks is not really a strength of his game. And so when you think about some of the leaky runs that the Bills give up defensively, I think Terrell Bernard and kind of some challenges playing off of contact contribute to that. Now, again, I think the front can be better in front of Terrell Bernard, and it has to be. I think if you want to get the most out of Terrell Bernard as your middle linebacker, you need to make sure that he's covered up and protected by having a good defensive line in front of him that can allow him to run and play free and chase the football, which is what he does at his best. And so I'm hoping that the defense can be more stable around him, whether that's Bobby Babich in year 2, an improved defensive line, more cohesion in the back 7. And then, he kind of builds a little bit more off of the 2023 season while also, kind of being viewed as that big time leader for this football team. Now, one of the things that's interesting that maybe some people considered when this deal came through is, what does it mean for Matt Milano? In fact, I was about to record with Kyle Krabs on Friday morning for the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast. And right before we started recording, the news came through, and Kyle's first question was, hey, what do you think this means for Matt Milano? And I don't think it really means anything. The Bills are kind of locked into this contract. If the Bills were to move on from Matt Milano right now, it would be $17.2 million in dead cap and a $1.4 million cap reduction. That's just not going to happen. Now, you can do it post June 1st, and that would get you $6 million in 2025 cap savings, but $9.6 million in dead cap this year and $11 million in dead cap next year. I don't think you really want to sign up for that. I think obviously the best path forward with Matt Milano is for him to be a good player for the Bills, right? That's the best thing that can happen. And I think once he came back from the injury late in the season, right in December, I thought he got incrementally better throughout the course of his getting more playing time and getting more comfortable. And he looked a little bit more like Matt Milano by the end there, where it was a little bumpy to start. And I think the fact that he came back and very quickly became an every snap player kind of tells us the vision and belief and trust that the Bills have in Matt Milano. And so I think that's going to be the plan next year, is for Bernard and Milano to patrol that second level. Hopefully they can stay healthy. Hopefully things can be more stable around them. And then this defense can get to the caliber of defense that the Bills need it to be to, win in the postseason and get over the hump. So you can see the vision. Health is going to matter. Stabilizing around these players is going to matter. But Terrell Bernard comfortably in Buffalo's plans, signing a 4-year, $50 million contract with the Buffalo Bills. All right, coming up next, I want to talk about DK Metcalf, Trey Hendrickson, Myles Garrett, and Joey Bosa, and kind of where the Bills fall when it comes to pursuing all of those players. So, folks, be sure to stick with me. When the NBA action tips off, the game is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, You can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I miss my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, there's a bunch of players that are becoming made available for trade, some players that have been released, and obviously a lot of curiosity on, where do the Bills fall in these conversations? And I want to share my thoughts on what level of interest the Bills should have in DK Metcalf and Trey Hendrickson. And of course, we'll kind of catch up on the Myles Garrett situation. And of course, Joey Bosa, who was just released. And obviously the Bills have a need for a defensive end. So let's get into this. Let's start with DK Metcalf. And if you guys were following my coverage of the NFL, when DK Metcalf was a draft prospect, you know how much I love him. I thought the world of DK Metcalf. He was a top 10 player on my board, and he was a very, 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 very controversial and polarizing prospect because he is a unique receiver that has a ton of size, a ton of explosiveness, but he's not a guy that runs routes like Antonio Brown, right? Like he's a bigger dude that's not going to be really fluid on the horizontal plane. You're not going to get a lot out of DK Metcalf really running routes that ask him to hit hard horizontal breaks. He's just not that type of guy. He's a lot more of a linear athlete. But when you looked at the release package, when you looked at the ball skills, the size, just how explosive he is for his size, I thought he was a player that just screamed unique, rare, all the stuff. And I loved him. And he fell to the end of the second round, not really because of the skill set, but because there was some injury stuff, right? Like a neck injury and a foot injury. And obviously he's come into the NFL and been terrific, over 900 yards every season to start his career. And I think he's in pretty rare company with like his production to this point in his career. But here's what I'll say about DK Metcalf. I think when you consider what the Bills could use at receiver, DK Metcalf is exactly what the offense needs, right? An outside player, not a slot only, an outside player that brings verticality, right? That's what DK Metcalf is. And he's definitely a mismatch player where from a size and athleticism perspective, he's a problem for opponents. It's tantalizing, right? It really is. But I'm not fully convinced it's the right move for the Bills. This offense was really good last year. It scored 30 points per game, highest scoring offense in the history of the Bills, most touchdowns in the history of the Bills. Efficiency metrics were off the charts. And so with your bigger problems clearly on the defensive side of the football, I wouldn't want DK Metcalf at the expense of an impact defensive lineman. So the opportunity cost is what really gets me concerned here. Who wouldn't love DK Metcalf? Of course I would. Of course I want DK Metcalf. But it's not that simple. It's how does acquiring DK Metcalf affect your ability to address your bigger needs? And that's where I have a level of concern. And the reports are that Seattle is seeking a first and a third round pick. Well, that's pretty rich. And DK Metcalf wants $30 million a season. So there's a lot to consider there. And while he would certainly make the team better, and as I stated, I love DK Metcalf. I think he's exactly the type of receiver that would really kind of fit the need for the Bills and exactly what they're looking for. I just get way more concerned about more pressing needs and wonder if it's the right thing to do with the resources that the Bills have. So I'm not going to be mad if the Bills get DK Metcalf, but there are bigger needs on the defensive side of the football, which gets us to Trey Hendrickson. And he's been wanting a trade. The Bengals finally gave him permission to seek a trade. And let me tell you, Trey Hendrickson is one of my favorite players in the NFL. He's an absolute dude. This is funny because this is like literally two of my favorite players in the league that are available for trade. And I think they both will get traded. And Trey Hendrickson's awesome. He's a Pro Bowler the last 4 years, was second in the Defensive Player of the Year voting this past season, 17 and a half sacks in each of the last 2 years. He's a freaking good football player. That's exactly what the Bills defense needs, right? So I just talked about exactly what the Bills offense needs. This is exactly what the Bills defense needs. And he's got familiarity with Ryan Nielsen. Bills hired Ryan Nielsen to be a senior defensive assistant. Ryan Nielsen was part of the coaching staff that drafted him in 2017 with the Saints, and then, of course, was part of that development early in his career where Nielsen was the defensive line coach, like worked specifically with Trey Hendrickson. Deion Dawkins has come out and gave rave reviews about Trey Hendrickson and the type of player that he is. Now, Hendrickson is entering his age 30 season, so I think you're looking at maybe 3 years or so of this same type of impact that he's capable of making. You know, this isn't a 25, 26-year-old pass rusher. And reports are that the Bengals are seeking a late second-round pick. Hello, the Bills have 2 of those. They have pick was a 56 and 60. So it feels like the Bills have exactly what it would take to get Trey Hendrickson, and obviously they can certainly make the cap work. I'd be in favor of this in a big way. Like, definitely a move that I'm sitting here hoping the Bills make. Now, is there a level of concern from Cincinnati to trade him to Buffalo? Sure, I'm sure that's part of it. And if they can get a late second-round pick from another team like the Lions or the Commanders, you know, they'd probably be more interested in sending him to those teams. But if the Bills can pull it off, this is exactly who I would want the Bills to trade for. And by the way, he's a right side player. And we all know that Greg Rousseau is a left side player, best on the left side. So I like how those players could work together. Let's talk about Myles Garrett. Of course, you know that I want the Bills to trade for Myles Garrett. It's going to be expensive to do it. But the new story here is that obviously the Browns have been very vocal about not wanting to trade Myles Garrett, which is exactly the position that they should have, right? This is, to me, a top 3 or 4 player in the history of their organization, and they shouldn't be eager to just let him get traded, right? I certainly understand their stance there. Now, what is very interesting is reports came out on Friday, actually, that Myles Garrett requested a meeting with the owner, and the owner said no, which is crazy to me. Like, that was definitely, to me, Myles Garrett showing a willingness to kind of maybe make things work and have a conversation. And he said no, but then they still don't want to trade him. I think it's only a matter of time, but I do worry about Myles Garrett and that trade being something that lingers and like maybe even gets to a holdout, maybe even gets into the early season where he has to literally sit out games before this gets done. And maybe for the Browns, they're comfortable with that because I'm sure there's not a lot of good graces that are going to come from trading away a player of his caliber. It'll be expensive, but I think that Myles Garrett's the best defensive player in the league and would obviously give this Bills defense exactly what they need. So the hard part is how can you wait? If you're a Bills team that needs this defensive line impact, you want to get that taken care of. You can't be wondering if in 5 months you're going to be able to trade for Myles Garrett and let other opportunities pass you by. So if you can get Trey Hendrickson done for a late 2, do it. And then I think you can maybe live with not getting Myles Garrett, knowing that you're giving up way less compensation to get a player that I think can still give you the same type of impact that you're looking for. No, he's not Myles Garrett. Nobody is. But Trey Hendrickson is an absolute dude. Let's talk real quick about Joey Bosa. I'm getting a lot of questions from people on Joey Bosa. Obviously, has been a really good player for the Chargers, but he is a buyer beware guy for me. I mean, he turns 30 in July. He's hurt all the time. In the last 3 years, he's played in 28 of 51 possible games. And I want to bring players to the Bills that you can count on and are reliable players. If you told me Joey Bosa is going to be healthy, great. He hasn't been healthy. And he's now entering his age 30 season. And so, yeah, I'm not giddy on this one for sure. I'd let some other team find out if he can be durable and available. I understand that he does the thing that the Bills need, but I mean, probably a decent contract. And the fact that he's been hurt all the time gives me a lot of concern about making an investment there. All right, folks, let's do a little herd mentality. Got some good questions that I'm going to address here on the other side of it. Be sure to stick with me. All right, herd mentality. This is usually a full episode where I answer questions, but given the timing of the week and then, of course, some of this other news that I had to get into, we're only going to do a segment of it this week, but I have 4 items lined up. Let's get into it. First one comes from Robert. Robert says there are a large number of defensive tackles in this draft, which is a huge need, but not so many defensive backs and safeties or wide receivers. Since there are so many good defensive tackles, I'm thinking they should draft the scarcest quantity position in the first and second round. I would love to see them get Nick Emanwari, Jake Betch, and Trey Amos with the first 3 picks. What are your thoughts? My thoughts are, boy, I'd be disappointed if the Bills made a pick in the first and 2 in the second, and none of them were trench players. I recognize needs at receiver and corner, but I mean, I don't care if there's lots of good options. If there are options that make sense and are like worth the pick that you're going to make, get those players. I'm not going to allow that the positional scarcity dictate that. And I do think there are a lot of good corners in this draft. So football games are one of the trenches. I want the Bills to invest those early picks in trench players because I think they're going to go. Because even if there are a lot of them, they're going to get drafted. And so I think that offsets the appetite that I would have to wait. So no, I want trench players with these early picks. Harwood says, I have a question for herd mentality. Would you be interested in Trey White returning to the Bills for this season? If so, what would the cost be? And do you think that he's going to demand, and what cost would you be comfortable with? I'd probably pass on Trey White. I want more upside. I mean, Trey White's, of course, we are all familiar with the injury history. He's now 30 years old. He signed with the Rams. That lasted 4 games. They cut him. He goes to the Ravens and is like a platoon player with Brandon Stevens and Nate Wiggins at corner. I thought he mostly struggled. And I feel like that has run its course. And it's unfortunate how it ended, but I'm looking for more of an upside play for the Bills at that CB2 spot. And so if they did want to go with the veteran, kind of get through a season, there are more attractive players that have played better football lately than Trey White. So I would not pursue Trey White. I would certainly be interested in some other options. And, I think there's something about a player like Trey White of that caliber coming back. It's not like Jordan Phillips is like a rotational defensive lineman coming back. But Trey White was a franchise cornerstone. And, he comes back and now all of a sudden he's got to compete with like Kyer Elam for a starting job. I'm not saying he wouldn't do that, but I just feel like Trey White's run his course. And, again, it's been a long time. It's been a really long time since we've seen him play good football. And I don't want to count on him to be the answer when it's not been a good story to tell over the last several years. Josh says, I've seen some recent mock drafts that have the Bills taking Malachi Starks at 30th overall. Malachi Starks is a defensive back from Georgia. If that was the route we went, could he fill Terran's role and Terran bump to outside corner? Is Terran able to play outside corner, or is he a nickel corner only? So if the Bills drafted Malachi Starks, they would do so for him to be a free safety. That's what Malachi Starks does. He plays deep zones. He wouldn't be an option for me in the slot. And I'm really surprised by the amount of questions, and I'm not taking a shot at you, Josh, but I get a lot of questions from people that are wanting to move Taron Johnson. They want to move him to safety. They want to move him to outside corner. It's like, this guy's been one of the best slot corners in the league. Why are we talking about moving him anywhere? So I'd like for Taron Johnson to continue performing at a high level at the position where he's told us he's best at. And I certainly don't think it's outside corner. I don't think that'd be the best spot to play Taron Johnson. Now, I love Malachi Starks. He's a good prospect. But I think the plan for the Bills at safety is Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop. I really do. I'm not expecting a big investment here. I'm not expecting an early draft pick. I'm not expecting a big free agent contract. I'm expecting the Bills to roll with Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop. They'll add a depth piece. Cam Lewis will be in the mix, but I'm not really anticipating a big move at safety. Jason says, if the Bills make the most of the depth re-signings many expect, like Ty Johnson, Mac Hollins, Reggie Gilliam, Quentin Morris, etc., then they'll likely have 40-plus players from last year's 53-man roster returning with the inside track to being on the roster in 2025. That would seem like a very low degree of turnover in the NFL from one year to the next. Is that the case, or is it more common than I think? With few roster spots available and a lot of draft capital, it has me thinking the Bills should be going after quality over quantity and being aggressive, bigger ticket free agents, pursue big trades, trading draft picks to move up, or get 2026 picks. I'm not sure if this is actually interesting or rare, so I don't know how much of a hot take this is, but my hot take is that 80% or more of the Bills' 2024 roster will be on the opening day roster in 2025. Of the new additions, one will be a high-profile edge, one other big-ticket free agent, and the rest will almost be rookies. So this is something that I kind of realized when I did my mock offseason, which was in yesterday's episode, is that I just didn't have a lot of roster spots available. And so that's why I did two trades up. I traded up into the third round and traded up into the fourth round because I just felt like I didn't have close to enough space to roster 10 rookies. And so, if the Bills do kind of bring back the players we expect them to, if they do, sign a handful of unrestricted free agents, they're going to be looking at a very difficult situation to roster their rookies. And it's a good problem to have. It's a very good problem to have, but it does, to me, open up conversations about exactly what you're talking about, moving up in the draft, trading draft capital for veterans like a Trey Hendrickson, and potentially even making a trade like the Bills made last year with the Bears, where they traded out of a 5th round pick and got the Bears 4th round pick this year. The Bills got like the 108th overall pick because they traded out of a 5th round pick last year. So yeah, like maintain flexibility. I think that's another thing that you can do. So I like where the Bills are at from a resource perspective, but I do think that allows them to be very specific, go get targets. And, how do you maximize your resources? I think that's the question any good GM should ask themselves. And so with this position that the Bills are in, I think using that draft capital to acquire veterans, using that draft capital to move up, using that draft capital to get capital in future years, all should absolutely be on the table for the Bills in their efforts to maximize their resources this offseason. And it's going to be an exciting offseason. This is, like I said several times, this is the most flexibility the Bills have had in a couple of years. And I'm very excited to see how it all comes together. And that picture will start becoming clear next week when the negotiating window opens on Monday. The new league year starts on Wednesday. We'll have a lot to talk about, and don't miss it. I'll be here for you every day breaking down all the moves. So make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.